My name is Beatrice. For 15 years, my job at Titan Construction wasn't laying bricks or designing skyscrapers. My job was to make sure the skyscrapers didn't fall down. I was the compliance and occupational safety manager. To most, I was the bureaucrat, the queen of paperwork, the master of technical standard minutia. But to the men and women on the scaffolding, I was the difference between going home to their families and becoming a statistic. Regulations aren't chains, they're safety harnesses, and I treated that as gospel. Until Arthur Coleman arrived. He wasn't a builder. He was a shark from the financial sector who took over as our new CEO. Arthur saw the company not as a legacy of concrete and steel, but as a spreadsheet of costs and profits. And on his spreadsheet, safety was a cost, ethics was a cost, human dignity was a cost to be optimized. The conflict was inevitable. It came in the form of the Legacy Tower, our most ambitious project. The project was behind schedule and over budget. In his first board meeting, Arthur presented his acceleration plan: illegal work shifts, cheaper materials that didn't meet safety codes, and most terrifyingly, the removal of safety nets on intermediate floors to streamline logistics. For his plan to work, he needed just one thing: my signature on the new safety reports. A signature that would legalize the illegal, that would validate the dangerous. I refused. In front of the entire board, I presented my own data. These weren't opinions, they were facts. Arthur, what you're proposing violates OSHA's construction standards, exposes us to 8-figure fines, and frankly, it's playing Russian roulette with our employees' lives. He listened to me with a condescending smile. When I finished, he stood up, walked slowly to the head of the table, and looked at me as if I were an insect. "Beatrice," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "your dedication to red tape is touching, but Titan Construction didn't get to the top by being timid." He turned to the room. "We need progress, speed, and we can't have anchors dragging us down." His gaze returned to me, cold as steel. "You're an anchor, Beatrice, an obstacle to this company's future, and I don't tolerate obstacles." Then the final blow. "Consider this your last service rendered. Your position is eliminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your belongings." I was fired in front of the same people I'd worked with for over a decade. No one said a word. Their silence was the second humiliation. As I was escorted out, Arthur was smiling, victorious. He thought he'd gotten rid of the bureaucrat. He thought he'd removed the anchor. He had no idea I wasn't the anchor. I was the iceberg, and he was sailing straight towards me at full speed. I spent the first night in a state of cold shock, the boardroom scene replaying in my mind, the arrogance on Arthur's face, the cowardice in the eyes of my former colleagues. He called me an anchor, a deadweight, but in his rush for profits, he forgot an anchor's most basic function, to keep the ship from crashing against the rocks. He had just cut his own safety line. On the second day, the fog of humiliation began to lift, replaced with a razor-sharp clarity. My mind, trained for years to find loopholes, identify risks, and follow procedures, got to work. But this time, the project wasn't protecting Titan Construction. The project was Titan, or rather, its new captain. Arthur thought the battle was over, right there in that room. He didn't understand that my battlefield wasn't debate, but documentation. My weapon wasn't my voice, it was my pen. And more importantly, it was my deep knowledge of a system he despised. And that's when I remembered the federal safety audit. It was the terror of every construction company, a quinquennial event, one that occurs every 5 years where government auditors, armed with the most obscure regulations, turn the company upside down. One major non-compliance could halt a project for months, generate astronomical fines, and destroy a CEO's reputation. And checking the calendar, I realized Titan's audit window would open in less than 3 months. My secret weapon wouldn't be an anonymous email to the board or a tip to the press. That would be loud, emotional, and easily dismissed as the bitterness of a fired employee. No, my revenge would be silent, elegant, and above all, bureaucratic. It would be a masterpiece of malicious compliance. I spent the next 2 weeks in my home office, not writing a complaint, but a guide. The title was innocuous: A Guide to Excellence in Construction Industry Audits. It looked like a best practices manual, a document any company would love to have, but its content was pure poison disguised as medicine. Chapter by chapter, I detailed the critical verification points an exemplary auditor should analyze. Section 3.4, cross-referencing of time clock records with worksite access reports to ensure compliance with rest period mandates. It was an open invitation to discover Arthur's illegal work shifts. Appendix B, checklist for material batch certifications versus purchase invoices. A death trap to expose the cheap materials he bought. Every paragraph was a landmine, carefully planted on the path I knew the auditors had to follow. I was making not a single accusation. I just pointed, with laser precision, to where the auditors should look. I was using the system itself, the very bureaucracy Arthur ridiculed, as a weapon. He wanted speed. He wanted shortcuts. I was just making sure the road was perfectly marked for the inspection. The trap was set. And it was beautiful. Arthur thought rules were for the weak. I was going to prove they are the strength of the intelligent. If you believe that competence and ethics always find a path to justice, subscribe to the channel. You're about to see what happens when the system is used against those who despise it. With the preparation guide finalized, the next step was delivery. I sent the document anonymously to the Federal Audit Department's general email. The subject line was, Citizens' Suggestion for Improving Inspection Processes. It was so bureaucratic, so harmless, I was certain it would be forwarded to the right person, some technician eager to optimize their work. And that's exactly what happened. A week later, I received a standardized, automated response. Thank you for your contribution. Your suggestions will be analyzed by our technical staff. The seed was planted. Meanwhile, at Titan Construction, Arthur was reigning over his new era of efficiency. I heard from an old contact in accounting, a gentleman who had always respected my work, that the company was breaking records for speed, for cost cutting, for profit margins. Arthur was the hero of the board. The legacy tower was progressing at a pace never seen before. He was on top of the world, handing out bonuses and giving interviews about his disruptive management style. Every news of his success was music to my ears. Every profit report leaked to the press was another shovelful of dirt on his grave. He wasn't building a legacy. He was building the most beautiful, well-documented case of labor and safety violations an auditor could ever dream of. My preparation wasn't active. It was observational. I set up news alerts for Arthur and Titan. I monitored online civil engineering forums where some employees, under pseudonyms, were starting to complain about the working conditions. They're treating us like cattle on the legacy project, one said. We pray before we go up the scaffolding, another commented. I archived everything, not to use it, but as confirmation that my guide would be relevant. The first sign of panic didn't come from Arthur, but from the system. With 1 month to go before the audit window, Titan received the official notification. It was standard procedure, but the way it arrived was different. My contact in accounting called me, his voice low. Beatrice, I've never seen this. The audit notification came with an attachment, a new priority inspection protocol. It's a huge, incredibly detailed checklist. They're asking for documents they've never asked for before. The legal department is in an uproar. I smiled. My guide hadn't just been analyzed. It had been adopted. The audit's technical staff, seeing such a clear map to finding non-compliance, had turned it into their new work tool. Arthur, in his arrogance, underestimated the notification. "It's just more red tape," he said in a meeting, according to my contact. "Hire some consultants to fill out the paperwork. We're not stopping the project for this." He had no idea that the paperwork was a minefield I had designed especially for him. The panic wasn't his yet, but it was seeping into the company's structure, climbing slowly, floor by floor, like a silent leak, and soon it would reach his office. The first day of the audit at Titan Construction was quiet. A team of 4 federal auditors set themselves up in a conference room, armed with my priority inspection protocol. They didn't want a tour of the company. They didn't want lunch with the board. They wanted documents, stacks and stacks of them. My contact in accounting described the scene to me in short text messages. They're asking for the last 6 months of time clock records and cross-referencing them with the biometric access logs from the site entrance. They've already found 300 cases of unpaid overtime. An hour later, now they've asked for the invoices for the structural steel and the badge certificates. The head of procurement is sweating bullets. Arthur, who had planned a trip to Dubai to celebrate the success of the Legacy Tower, was forced to cancel. On the second day, he was summoned by the auditors. The meeting, which should have been a formality, lasted 4 hours. According to my informant, Arthur left the room pale. His narrative of disruptive management was being confronted by the cold gray reality of codes and regulations. The chaos began to spill outside the company walls at the end of the first week. One of the auditors, upon finding evidence that a batch of substandard cement had been used in the foundations, issued an immediate stop work order for an entire section of the Legacy project. The news leaked to a business blog. The headline was short and brutal. Titan's luxury tower project halted over safety risks. It was the first time Arthur's name was publicly associated not with success, but with danger. The construction company's stock, which had been on a bull run, plummeted. The board, which had once applauded him, now bombarded him with calls. Arthur's panic became the main spectacle at the company. He, the man who preached cost-cutting and an aversion to bureaucracy, was now drowning in it. He spent his days locked up with lawyers, trying to find loopholes in the very rules he had ignored. He yelled at managers, accusing them of incompetence, of not hiding the paperwork properly. He was hunting for the culprit, the ghost who had guided the auditors with such precision, never imagining that the architect of his ruin was the anchor he himself had thrown overboard. The tension was at its peak. The auditors hadn't even reached the halfway point of my guide. Every day, a new non-compliance was discovered, a new fine was calculated, a new crack appeared in Arthur's image and in the concrete of his precious Legacy Tower. He was no longer in control. The system he so despised had captured him, and I knew the worst was yet to come. Arrogance is the trap that the powerful build for themselves. If you believe no one is above the rules and that justice can be found in the details, subscribe to the channel to see the conclusion of this story. The fall will be methodical. After 2 weeks of audits, Titan Construction was already bleeding. Preliminary fines totaled in the tens of millions. The main project was partially halted, and the company's reputation was in tatters. Arthur was desperate. In a final attempt at damage control, he called an emergency meeting with the board of directors and, unbelievably, invited the chief auditors to align expectations and demonstrate full transparency. It was an act of pure hubris, an attempt to use his charisma to bypass the avalanche of facts.
I heard about the meeting from my contact, and I also knew the final item on the audit agenda. It was my masterpiece, the section I'd left for last in my guide, leadership compliance and civil and criminal liability, based on OSHA's General Duty Clause. It establishes that the ultimate responsibility for safety lies not with the managers or the workers, but with the company's highest management, with the CEO. The meeting was the perfect stage for my invisible climax. I wasn't there, but it was as if every word spoken by the auditors was my own. Arthur began the meeting with a rehearsed speech about new times, lessons learned, and his unwavering commitment to safety. He tried to paint the picture of a leader who had been poorly advised by his team. He subtly tried to shift the blame to me, the former compliance management that left flawed processes in place. That's when the chief auditor, a serious man of few words, interrupted him. "Mr. Coleman," he said, with a calm that cut through the air in the room, "we appreciate your presentation, but we have some final points to clarify. We are not investigating process failures. We are investigating direct decisions." He opened a folder. From it, he pulled a series of printed emails. They were Arthur's direct orders for the purchase of cheaper materials, the directives for the extra shifts, his formal refusals of my warnings. All documented. "Mr. Coleman, OSHA's General Duty Clause is very clear. The ultimate responsibility is yours. But what concerns us isn't just negligence, it's intent." The auditor paused and looked directly at Arthur. "We received an anonymous tip detailing that you were formally warned about every single one of these risks before making your decisions. The tip refers to a specific report presented by Miss Beatrice in her last meeting before she was terminated." The silence in the room was absolute. Arthur, who had tried to use me as a scapegoat, found himself cornered by my absence. He couldn't refute me. He couldn't attack me. I was a ghost of logic and procedure haunting him. The auditor continued. "Given the evidence that these decisions were made with full knowledge of the risks, ignoring formal technical warnings, our final report will recommend not only the most severe administrative fines, but also forwarding your case to the Department of Justice for investigation for willfully endangering lives and to the district attorney to investigate potential document fraud." Arthur crumbled. There were no shouts, no excuses, just the sound of his jaw hitting the floor, the color draining from his face. The board of directors now looked at him not with disappointment, but with horror. He wasn't an aggressive manager. He was a potential felon. He, who thought himself the master of the game, was defeated not by a rival, but by a paragraph. Section 5A.1 of the OSHA Act. A rule he didn't even know existed. My favorite rule. Bureaucracy wasn't my revenge. The law was. The emergency meeting didn't save Arthur. It sealed his fate. The auditor's recommendation for a criminal investigation was the final nail in the coffin for his career at Titan Construction. The next day, the board of directors, in a desperate attempt to save their own skins and the company's image, issued a statement. Arthur wasn't just leaving the company, he was being placed on leave to cooperate with investigations by the proper authorities. In corporate language, it was a death certificate. The consequences for the company were seismic. The Legacy Tower project was halted indefinitely. Titan was forced to set aside an exorbitant amount of money to cover the fines and the costs of redoing parts of the foundation and structure with the correct materials. The scandal shattered investor confidence, and the company, once a symbol of power, became a case study in mismanagement and criminal risk. They had to hire a very expensive outside consulting firm to overhaul their entire compliance program. Ironically, the savings Arthur sought by firing me cost the company hundreds of times my annual salary. For Arthur, the consequences were personal and devastating. The DOJ indicted him. He, the market shark, the magazine cover CEO,
became a defendant. His assets were partially frozen to guarantee payment for future labor settlements. His name, once synonymous with aggressive success, was now synonymous with fraud and danger. No board in the country would touch him. His career, as he knew it, was over. He wasn't defeated by a competitor or a market crisis. He was defeated by a set of rules he considered insignificant. As for me, I watched it all from a distance, reading the news with a cup of coffee in hand. There was no euphoria, just a sense of order being restored. The system, however slow and complex, has its own correction mechanisms. Sometimes it just needs someone with patience and knowledge to point it in the right direction. The guide I created, my silent weapon, was never traced back to me. It remained an anonymous contribution, an efficient ghost in the government machine. And that, for me, was the true victory, the proof that intelligence and method are infinitely more powerful than brute force and arrogance. While Titan Construction struggled to climb out of the bureaucratic swamp Arthur had created, I took some time for myself. I traveled, read books that weren't technical manuals, and for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of hundreds of lives on my shoulders. The revenge, in the end, wasn't the climax in the boardroom. It was the peace that came after. My retreat, however, was cut short by an unexpected email. It was from the head of the consulting firm that Titan had hired to put out the fire. He had found me through my old contact in accounting. The message was direct. "Beatrice, I've read the audit report, and I've read between the lines. No one in the market has your level of expertise in heavy construction compliance. We need you. Not as an employee, as a managing partner for a new risk management and compliance division." The irony was delicious. The very expertise for which I was humiliated and fired was now the most valuable asset on the market. I accepted, but on my own terms. I established my own consulting firm, taking his firm on as my first and largest client. I wouldn't have bosses. I would have partners. My first hire was that gentleman from accounting who retired from Titan and came to work with me as a financial consultant. He said he'd rather work with someone who builds safely. Today, my firm is the most respected in the industry. We don't just help construction companies pass audits. We create safety cultures that save lives and, consequently, save companies millions. We prove that doing the right thing isn't a cost. It's the best investment. My revenge on Arthur wasn't an act of destruction, but a validation. By trying to erase me, he only illuminated the value of my knowledge. By calling the rules an anchor, he forgot that it's the anchor that keeps the ship from sinking in a storm. He got rid of the anchor and went down. I gathered the wreckage and built a safe harbor. And from within it, I watched the horizon, knowing that the best structures, whether of concrete or career, are those built on the solid foundation of integrity. Beatrice's story proves that knowledge and integrity are the strongest foundations of all. If this journey of methodical justice inspired you, subscribe to Revenge of Victoria and share. We love to see how far our stories travel, so tell us in the comments what city, state, or country you're watching from. Until next time.